Hey, resilient souls. Welcome to English Story School. Part 1. The Day Silence Began. Have you ever imagined waking up one morning and realizing the one thing that defined you was gone forever? No sound, no scream, no whisper, just silence. For most people, that silence would mean the end. But for one man, it was just the beginning. His name was Liam Carter, a man whose voice once danced like fire across stages. People didn't just hear him, they felt him. His speeches were not just words, they were lifelines. He had this rare magic of saying what others only felt in the hidden corners of their hearts. Every sentence, every pause, every breath carried purpose. He wasn't just a speaker. He was a movement, the kind of man whose words could make you cry, laugh, and believe in yourself, all within the same minute. But destiny, as they say, doesn't care about applause. It cares about lessons, and sometimes it teaches the loudest ones through silence. It happened on a bright, cloudless morning, the kind of morning that feels like victory. Liam was standing backstage at one of his biggest conferences. Thousands of people filled the auditorium, banners with his name stretched across the walls, and cameras were ready to capture what was expected to be the speech of his career. His heart raced with passion, his mind clear and confident. As the lights dimmed and the crowd roared, he stepped forward, smiled, and took the mic. Then nothing. No sound came out, not even a whisper. His throat locked, as if invisible hands had gripped it tight. He coughed, tried again, panic rising, heart pounding, but still silence. The crowd murmured in confusion. The technicians scrambled, checking the microphone. But deep inside, Liam already knew something was wrong. In those frozen seconds, a lifetime flashed before his eyes. His words gone, his purpose fading. The one gift that built his identity had been stolen by something unseen and unstoppable. Later that day, doctors would name it vocal cord paralysis, permanent, irreversible, and devastating. The words that once lifted thousands had been trapped forever behind closed lips. For days, Liam sat alone in the dark corners of his home. No speeches, no phone calls, no light. Just the endless replay of that moment, the silence that swallowed him whole. The world outside moved on, but his world stood still. The man who once gave hope to millions now found himself drowning in hopelessness. He scribbled into his diary one night, the ink trembling under the weight of his grief. The cruelest silence isn't around me. It's the one inside me. He looked at the paper for hours, tears staining the edges. His thoughts screamed what his mouth couldn't say. He questioned everything, his purpose, his worth, even his faith. How could life be this cruel? How could destiny take away the one thing that made him who he was? Days turned into weeks. His once busy home became a museum of memories. Posters of his past speeches, old awards gathering dust, newspaper clippings of his rise. But the sound of silence was louder than ever. He stopped seeing friends. He stopped smiling. His body was alive, but his soul, it was fading. One evening, as the rain tapped gently on his window, Liam stood before his mirror, pale, exhausted, broken. He looked into his reflection and barely recognized himself. His once fiery eyes were now hollow, his confident stance now slouched in defeat. And that's when something shifted. Deep within that shattered reflection, he saw not the man he'd lost, but the man he could still become. It was like lightning in his soul, sudden, blinding, and unstoppable. A realization so simple, yet so powerful it changed everything. He grabbed his pen again and wrote, "If life took away my voice, maybe it wants me to listen differently." Those words hit him harder than any applause he'd ever heard. For the first time since the silence began, he felt alive again. Maybe this wasn't the end of his story. Maybe it was the beginning of a louder one, a voice that didn't depend on sound but on truth. He walked to his bookshelf, brushing his fingers across his favorite motivational books. Pages filled with words that had once guided him. And he smiled, not because he had found comfort, but because he had found purpose. That night, Liam didn't sleep. He wrote for hours, not speeches, not scripts, but raw thoughts straight from the heart. Words about pain, about silence, about rediscovering strength in the ruins of identity. His room glowed with candlelight as his pen moved faster and faster. Every sentence felt like a heartbeat returning to life. Sometimes, life doesn't mute you to punish you. It does it to make you hear what your soul has been whispering all along. The next morning, Liam stepped outside. The sun rose, painting the world gold, and for the first time in weeks, he smiled. Not out of joy, but out of understanding. The silence was still there, yes, but it no longer scared him. It no longer defined him. He realized something extraordinary. He hadn't lost his voice. He had lost his noise. That day, as he sat beneath an old oak tree, he whispered, not with words, but with spirit, "Thank you." Because sometimes losing everything is the only way to find what's truly yours. And that was the day the silence ended, not with sound, but with purpose. You don't need a voice to speak to the world. You just need something worth saying. Part 2. The Birth of Silent Strength. The night Liam wrote that one line, "If life took away my voice, maybe it wants me to listen differently," something inside him shifted forever. For weeks, he had lived in the shadows of self-pity, trapped between memories of applause and echoes of silence. But that night, he made a choice, not to surrender, but to transform. His home office, once filled with trophies and microphones, had become a graveyard of old dreams. Yet now, as the morning sunlight seeped through the curtains, it no longer felt like a tomb. It felt like a workshop, the birthplace of something new. Liam sat at his desk, took a deep breath, and opened his laptop. For the first time since losing his voice, he decided to speak again, not with sound, but with soul. He created a simple blank page and titled it the Silent Strength Project. It wasn't a brand or a campaign or comeback. It was therapy, a space to bleed truth, a space where he could pour every ounce of pain into words that might one day help someone else survive theirs. At first, he didn't know what to write. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, trembling like a man trying to relearn how to walk. But then the words began to flow, slow, broken, hesitant, yet real. He typed, "When life turns off your sound, turn up your soul." He paused, read it again, and smiled. For the first time, he didn't feel like a man who had lost something. He felt like someone who had found a deeper frequency, one that didn't need ears to be heard. Every post that followed came straight from his scars. They weren't polished or poetic, they were truths. He wrote about pain, about identity, about the emptiness of losing your purpose and a miracle of finding it again. His words carried fire because they were forged in silence. Sometimes, what breaks you isn't the end. It's just the beginning of your rebuilding. Days turn into weeks. Every night, he wrote under dim light, his fingertips flying like a musician rediscovering rhythm. Each post felt like breathing again. Writing became his voice. And for a while, that was enough. But still, there was fear. What if no one cared? What if his words vanished into the endless noise of the internet? For 2 weeks, there was silence. No comments. No likes. Just the digital void. But Liam didn't stop. He kept writing because this wasn't about recognition. It was about resurrection. Then, one night, as he checked his page before sleeping, he noticed a single comment. It read, "I've been fighting depression for months. Your words made me believe I can fight another day. Thank you." Liam stared at the screen, eyes wide, tears forming. That single message hit him harder than any applause he'd ever received. Someone, somewhere, had found hope through his silence. It was proof, even without a voice, he could still change lives. He smiled, whispering under his breath, "I'm still being heard." From there, everything changed. The comments started growing. Dozens turned into hundreds. People from around the world. Those who had lost jobs, families, confidence, even faith, found refuge in Liam's words. They called his posts letters from the soul. His once empty inbox overflowed with messages. "Your story reminds me to hold on. Your silence speaks louder than any words I've heard. Thank you for reminding me that broken doesn't mean finished." He sat reading them all night, heart swelling with something he hadn't felt in months. Purpose. The voice of the heart is louder than the noise of the mouth. That became his new mantra. He printed those words, framed them, and hung them on his wall. It reminded him daily, his silence was not his end. It was his evolution. Weeks passed, and the Silent Strength Project began spreading like wildfire. People started sharing his posts across social media. His words were translated into Spanish, French, Arabic, and Hindi. What had started as a whisper from a broken man was now becoming an anthem for millions who had forgotten their own worth. But what amazed Liam most wasn't the fame. It was the connection. People who had never met began forming communities, inspired by his messages. They began sharing their stories, their fears, their resilience. The project had become bigger than Liam. It was now a movement, a revolution of healing hearts. One morning, while scrolling through the growing flood of messages, he stumbled upon one from a woman in Japan who had lost her husband in an accident. She wrote, "I don't understand English well, but your words reach my heart. They made me cry, and somehow I'm breathing easier now." Liam put his hand over his chest. That message broke him open in the best way. He realized this was no longer about recovering his lost career. It was about something far greater. Sometimes life breaks you down, not to destroy you, but to rebuild you into the person the world truly needs. He saved that quote as his next post, and within hours, it went viral. Celebrities shared it, news outlets quoted it, and thousands of people began calling him the silent speaker. Ironically, the man who could no longer speak had become one of the most powerful voices online. The same world that once pitted him was now listening more closely than ever, without a single sound. Every word he wrote now carried weight, because it came from truth, not performance. He didn't have to shout to be heard. He simply had to be real. He began to understand something profound. Silence had become his superpower. It allowed him to feel what others missed, to express what most were afraid to admit. And as his influence grew, so did his humility. He no longer craved applause. He craved impact. Each night, before sleeping, he looked at his reflection and smiled. A calm, knowing smile. He typed in his private notes, "I lost my voice, but I found my echo in every heart that hears my silence." And as the moonlight fell across his desk, he felt something sacred, peace. The kind of peace that comes not from getting back what you lost, but from realizing you never truly lost anything. You just found a new way to express it. That was the birth of silent strength, not as a project, but as a purpose. And somewhere in that quiet night, Liam Carter became immortal, not by speaking louder, but by feeling deeper. True strength isn't in the volume of your voice, but in the depth of your truth. Part 3, The Storm Before the Miracle. But success didn't come without pain. In fact, the louder his silence grew, the more noise it began to attract. As the Silent Strength Project spread across continents, gathering millions of hearts who resonated with his story, it also caught the attention of the cynical ones, those who saw light and tried to dim it. At first, it started small. A few negative comments under his posts. Fake inspiration. He's just doing this for attention. If he really lost his voice, how's he typing so much? Liam read them in silence, each word like a dagger, piercing the fragile hope he'd rebuilt. He tried to ignore them, but words, even typed in digital ink, have weight. The same internet that had once lifted him now tried to bury him beneath judgment. Every night he'd scroll through his messages, hundreds of thank yous, and then one hateful line that overshadowed them all. It's strange how the human heart works. We forget 100 praises, but remember one insult. He would close his laptop, breathe deeply, and whisper to himself, "Stay strong." But some nights, even he didn't believe those words. The silence that once empowered him began to suffocate again. He found himself trapped between two worlds, one that adored him and one that despised him. And in that chaos, doubt crept in. He began asking himself, was this all for nothing? Was my message even real? One evening, after another wave of hate poured in, Liam sat in front of his laptop, his hands trembling. His eyes were red, tired, and swollen from sleepless nights. On the screen, the words "deactivate account" blinked at him, as if mocking him. His fingers hovered over the button. For a moment, it felt easier to vanish, to disappear back into silence forever. But life, as it always does, had a twist waiting. Just as he was about to click delete, a new message notification popped up. He almost ignored it until he saw the subject line, "You saved me." Curious, he opened it. It was from a teenage girl named Elena. Her message began softly. "I don't know if you'll ever read this, but your words stopped me from ending my life." Liam froze. His heart thudded hard against his chest. He scrolled slowly, his eyes tracing each word as if it were oxygen. "I tried to take my own life last week. I felt invisible, useless, broken. Then I saw your post. Even silence has a heartbeat." Those words made me cry. It felt like someone finally understood me. I'm still here because of you. For a long time, Liam couldn't move. Tears rolled down his cheeks, blurring the screen. His chest tightened, not from pain, but from an overwhelming wave of emotion he hadn't felt in months. That night, he didn't just feel heard, he felt alive. It was as if God himself had whispered, "See, you still matter." He realized something profound, something that would redefine his entire journey. My pain isn't my prison, it's my platform. The next morning, instead of deleting his account, he opened a blank document. His fingers danced across the keys, faster than his thoughts could form. The words came straight from his soul. Don't curse your silence. Sometimes, it's the only way the world will finally listen. He posted it with trembling hands. And then, something incredible happened. Within hours, the post began to explode. Likes, shares, comments, thousands, then millions. The world wasn't just reading, it was feeling. People from every corner of the globe, soldiers, single mothers, cancer survivors, students, all commented the same thing. Thank you for saying what I couldn't. It was as if Liam had given a voice to those who had none. News outlets picked it up within days. Headlines read, "The man who spoke without a voice." The silent strength that shook the internet. For the first time in history, someone became famous, not for what he said, but for what he didn't. Soon, invitations started flooding in. Universities wanted him to speak to their students. Global conferences reached out, asking him to share his silence. NGOs called, saying his message aligned with mental health movements worldwide. But here's the catch, he still couldn't speak. So how did he do it? When Liam stood on stage, there was no microphone, no speech, just a man standing tall in silence, with his story written behind him in luminous words on a giant screen. The audience would read as he gestured, smiled, cried, and pointed toward lines that spoke louder than sound ever could. You don't need a voice to make people listen. You just need truth. He'd lift his hands to the crowd, and people would rise to their feet, clapping, crying, shouting his name. His silence filled rooms in ways noise never could. A journalist once asked him in an interview, through text, "How does it feel to lose your voice but gain the world?" Liam typed back, "I didn't lose my voice. I just discovered it was never my throat that spoke. It was my soul." That single line became a quote the world would never forget. It was painted on murals, printed on posters, and shared in classrooms. He became more than a speaker. He became a symbol, proof that limitations don't end you. They redirect you. But even as fame grew, Liam never forgot that one message from Elena, the girl who'd reminded him of his why. He printed her words and framed them on his wall, right above his desk. Every time doubt whispered again, he looked at that frame and smiled. "Your words stopped me. You don't know me, but you saved me." Those lines reminded him. His story wasn't about what he lost. It was about what he found through loss. And as he stared at that frame, a realization sank deep into his heart. The real miracle wasn't that he regained confidence or fame. It was that through his silence, he had taught millions how to listen. Part 4. The Voice of Millions. Liam's story didn't just grow, it exploded. What started as a few lines typed in pain had turned into a movement that the world called the revolution of silent voices. It wasn't a trend. It was a transformation. People who had lost something, their dreams, their loved ones, their faith, their hope, found themselves in Liam's words. His story became their mirror. His silence became their anthem. Everywhere he looked, people were writing, sharing, and creating under one common hashtag. Hashtag silent strength. Soldiers returning from war wrote how they finally faced their trauma through his message. Parents grieving their children said his words became their reason to breathe again. Students, bullied for being different, said they now saw their flaws as the start of something new. Liam had never spoken again since that day, yet his message now echoed across millions of hearts and screens. He was no longer just a man who lost his voice. He had become a symbol of endurance. He would sit by his window every morning, sunlight pouring over his desk, and type with purpose. His laptop had become his stage, his fingers his voice, and every word he wrote had the rhythm of truth. He once typed in a video message that went viral worldwide. The world doesn't need more noise. It needs more truth. That single line became a thunderclap of awakening. People began tagging him in stories of triumph. A woman who rebuilt her business after bankruptcy. A young boy who learned to walk again after an accident. A musician who played his guitar even after losing his hearing. Liam's silence had become a megaphone for the broken. Proof that pain doesn't end you. It refines you. He started mentoring young writers, helping them transform wounds into words. Every online session began with his typed greeting. Don't write to impress. Write to express. He'd then gesture toward his heart and smile, a silent message that said, truth speaks louder than talent. His sessions became so popular that people booked months in advance just to hear him, even though they knew they never would. One of his students, a shy boy named Marcus, once asked through chat, "Sir, do you ever miss your voice?" Liam paused, thought for a while, and typed back, "I don't miss it. I just speak differently now." That answer spread across social media, used in classrooms, motivational seminars, and even therapy centers. It reminded people that communication wasn't about sound. It was about connection. Every post, every video, every message Liam sent carried that pulse. The heartbeat of a man who turned tragedy into testimony. His silence wasn't empty. It was full of meaning, power, and light. Soon, his journey reached places he never dreamed of. Major publications like Time, Forbes, and The Guardian featured his story. Headlines read, "The man who taught the world to listen. From silence to global symphony." He was invited to international conferences, charity events, and even TED Talks. But when Liam walked onto the stage, there was no microphone waiting, no speech cards, no teleprompter, just a giant screen behind him glowing with words he had written, and a crowd waiting in breathless anticipation. He stood still for a few seconds, looking around the room filled with thousands of people, cameras flashing, lights blinding. Then his first sentence appeared on the screen behind him. "You don't need a voice to make noise. You just need a reason." The audience went silent, a silence so deep, so pure, it felt sacred. They read every word he had prepared, and by the time his final line faded away, silence is not weakness. It's the echo of strength. People rose to their feet. They cried. They clapped. They screamed his name. And yet, Liam stood there, smiling, saying nothing. Because he didn't have to. The message had already reached them where sound could never go, straight into the soul. A few months later, his story was turned into a documentary titled Echoes of the Unspoken. It won awards worldwide, not because it was sad, but because it was real. It showed the world that pain, when accepted, becomes purpose. During one interview for the documentary, the host asked him via text, "How did you find courage when everything was taken from you?" Liam smiled at the screen, paused for a moment, and typed back, "Everything wasn't taken. Only the noise was. What remained was truth." That line shook the internet once again. It was printed on T-shirts, billboards, murals in schools, anywhere people needed hope. It became the new anthem of resilience. But despite the fame, the attention, and the global love, Liam never changed. He still lived simply. He still typed his words alone at night, still read every message, still cried at the stories his followers sent him. He remained human, real, humble, raw. Sometimes he'd look up from his desk, close his eyes, and imagine his old life. The microphone, the applause, the thunder of thousands listening to his words. Then he'd smile softly and think, they still listen, just differently now. He knew deep inside that silence had done something extraordinary to him. It had stripped away ego, noise, and vanity, and revealed something purer, deeper, and infinitely stronger. One day, while reading comments on one of his posts, he came across a simple message from a young woman that read, "Because of you, I stopped hating my story." Liam leaned back in his chair, tears glistening in his eyes. That line hit him harder than any standing ovation ever could, because in that moment, he realized his life's mission was complete. He hadn't just found his purpose. He had given millions of others a reason to find theirs. "You don't need fame to make history," he typed one night. "You just need the courage to rise when life tells you to stay down." And that courage, the courage born in silence, had turned him into something far greater than a motivational speaker. He had become the voice of millions. Part 5. The Legacy That Spoke Forever. Years later, as dawn stretched across the quiet horizon, Liam sat by the window of his small countryside home, a home built on peace, not perfection. The morning light slipped through the curtains, dancing gently on his desk, where an old laptop rested like a faithful companion. He had aged gracefully. Faint lines framed his face, each one etched with stories of struggle, strength, and silent triumphs. His eyes, once filled with pain, now carried a calm glow, the kind that only comes after you've wrestled with darkness and learned to call a teacher. Outside, the world was waking up. Birds chirped softly. The wind carried the scent of rain and new beginnings. For Liam, mornings had always been sacred, not because they brought the promise of a new day, but because they reminded him how far he had come from the man who once wanted to end it all. He glanced at the framed photographs on the wall, silent memories frozen in time. One showed him standing before a massive crowd, holding nothing but a notepad that read, "Your silence is your power." Another showed the message boards of schools and hospitals where his words were carved in bold letters. And then one frame caught his eye, his very first post from the Silent Strength Project. He ran his fingers gently across the faded printout. "When life turns off your sound, turn up your soul." That single sentence had once saved him from disappearing, and now it had saved thousands he had never met. Liam smiled softly. His silence, once a curse, had become a language understood across the globe. But it wasn't the fame that mattered to him now. It was the stories of the lives he had unknowingly touched. That morning, as sunlight spilled over his desk, his inbox pinged with a new message. The subject line read, "You change my world." He opened it. It was from a 12-year-old boy named Noah. The words were full of raw honesty, clumsy, yet powerful. "I was born without a voice. But I read your story, and I started writing my thoughts. My teacher read them to the class, and now everyone listens when I write. Because of you, I believe I have something to say, even if I can't say it out loud." Liam stared at the screen for a long time, his vision blurring as tears gathered in his eyes. He pressed his hand to his heart. It beat steadily, a rhythm of gratitude. This was it, the full circle. The boy who once felt voiceless had become a symbol for millions who once believed silence meant insignificance. He leaned back in his chair and looked out the window again. The sky had turned brighter, painted in gold and blue, alive with promise. The silence around him was no longer heavy. It was sacred. It was home. He knew it was time for one final message, his last gift to the movement he had created, nurtured, and watched grow into something far greater than himself. He opened his laptop, the same one where the Silent Strength Project was born, and began to type. His fingers trembled slightly, not from weakness, but from emotion. Every keystroke was a heartbeat. Every sentence, a final breath of purpose. "I lost my voice to find my soul. Now my soul speaks for me." He paused, reflecting on those words. They felt like closure, honest, complete, and eternal. But Liam had learned that truth deserves to echo, not end. So he continued, "To those still fighting your quiet battles, know this. The world may never understand your silence, but it will always feel your energy. Don't hide your scars. They are proof that you lived, that you fought, that you mattered. When life steals your sound, speak through your kindness, your courage, your creation. Speak through the way you rise after you fall, because that's where the real voice lives, in the things you do when no one's listening." When he finished typing, he reread it, not as a writer, but as a survivor. It wasn't just a message. It was a mirror of his entire journey. He clicked post. Within minutes, his message began to spread. Within hours, it crossed borders. And within days, it became the most shared message in the world that year. People quoted it in classrooms, painted it on walls, printed it on shirts. Hashtags flooded social media. Hashtag Silent Strength. Hashtag Voice of the Soul. Hashtag Liam Lives On. The media called it the final whisper heard around the world. But for Liam, it wasn't about being heard anymore. It was about helping others find their voice within the silence. Schools began introducing the Silent Strength Program, a writing project encouraging children to express emotions through words and art rather than noise. Hospitals placed his quotes in hallways, comforting families in their hardest moments. Writers began dedicating their first books to him, calling him the man who taught the world how to listen. 1 year later, a global foundation was launched in his name, the Liam Carter Foundation for Expression and Healing. Its purpose, to give a platform to those who had none. Mute children, trauma survivors, and artists who had lost hope, all found belonging under his name. His silence had built an entire movement that now roared with millions of voices united by one truth. You don't need sound to matter. Even after his passing, the world continued to quote him. His words appeared on murals, monuments, and in graduation speeches. His story became part of school curriculums, a reminder that sometimes the greatest speeches are written in the language of endurance, not eloquence. Years later, people would still whisper his words before taking brave steps. You may lose your sound, but never your song. You may lose your voice, but never your message. And in moments of stillness, when life felt too loud or too heavy, they would remember Liam, sitting quietly by a window, smiling at the sunrise, at peace with everything that once broke him. Because Liam's story wasn't about losing something. It was about discovering everything that truly mattered: purpose, impact, meaning. He had turned pain into poetry. He had turned silence into strength. And he had turned one broken voice into the chorus of humanity's hope. And so, as the world continued to move, his legacy stood still, shining like dawn, gentle yet unstoppable. Because sometimes the loudest roar truly comes from the quietest soul. And with that said, thanks for watching, and until next time.